Pro-euthanasia campaigner Dr Philip Nitschke has proposed that Adelaide should host Australia's first euthanasia clinic.
South Australia is poised to become the first Australian state to allow doctors to end the lives of their patients, with new legislation currently before that state's parliament. And Dr Nitschke is in Adelaide today. He joins us now from the ABC's Adelaide newsroom. Dr Nitschke, good morning.
Good morning.
What's your understanding of what this legislation actually involves, or more importantly, what it will allow?
Look, it's very progressive legislation. I think it's very wise too. What it allows, of course, what it's effectively going to do is to decriminalise when a doctor helps a terminally ill patient achieve a peaceful death. They'll still be breaking the law, but they won't receive any legal consequences to that act, provided they stick to within the stipulated guidelines. So it's a very clever way of approaching it. It's not making it legal, such as we saw in the Northern Territory, but it will allow doctors the confidence of knowing that they can respond when a patient in desperation asks for help to die without fearing any severe legal consequence.
Are there any guidelines in place for severity of illness and things like that?
Oh yes, I mean the guidelines will be there, as we saw in the attempts to bring in legalisation of voluntary euthanasia. A person will have to be terminally ill and of sound mind, and there'll be several other requirements. A person will have to be an adult, of course. So those sorts of guidelines will still be in place, but what it will allow is for the relatively rare occasion when a person does find themselves in that extreme situation where they crave a peaceful death, a doctor will be able to provide them with that assistance without fearing savage legal penalty.
Will it just apply to, say, South Australian patients, or will we see, as is the case in a few European countries, patients being able to fly in from elsewhere to make use of these facilities?
No, there'll be strict residential requirements, so it's not going to be a case where people can cross the border and take advantage of what will be a civilising piece of legislation here in Adelaide. So it'll be restricted to South Australia. But of course, when we see changes like this take place in one state, we can't have people in New South Wales and Victoria sitting there wondering why they don't have access to the same services. So we expect to see effectively a domino effect once we see one state have the courage to go down this path.
And what do you see as the prospects of this bill getting through?
Oh, very good, because I think it's a wise strategy. We're not, as I said, introducing legalisation. It's very much like the Dutch did, where they had some 15 or 20 years of decriminalised environment before they brought in legislation in 2001, and that effectively allowed the population of that country to become quite comfortable with the process. And I think it's a clever way to go forward when, by and large, we've seen state parliaments very reluctant in the past 15 years to bring in legislation as far-reaching as the law we saw briefly in the Northern Territory.
You talked there about a possible domino effect. Is public opinion there yet, nationally?
Oh, public opinion is definitely there. We know what the public of Australia want. They want to see changes in legislation so that people who find themselves in this situation have got access to help without having to go through the significant situations we see appearing in front of the law courts of the nation on a regular basis, where people out of compassion and love help someone to achieve a peaceful death and then find themselves sitting in front of a jury, with a jury working out how they're going to spend their next decade. So the people of Australia want change, and by and large politicians have got to have the courage to step up to this one, and I think we're seeing that now finally in South Australia, and we expect later this year in Tasmania.
Now, you're obviously in Adelaide to speak to those behind the bill, but you're also looking at facilities, potential sites for facilities should this legislation pass.
That's true. There is a need, I feel, and this is one of the lessons we learnt from Darwin back in 1996. There's a need for some coordinating structure, if you like, a specialist clinic, where people who do decide or elect to go down this path can have coordinated services and structures in place. You need to provide more than just the lethal drugs. You need to provide the backup, the counselling, the peripheral services, which were simply occasionally lacking when we first went down this path many years ago in Darwin, and that's why a clinic makes sense. And so the plan is to set a clinic up here. It'll be a coordinating specialist clinic. It'll only operate in this initial phase probably once one day a week or one day a fortnight, but the plan will, of course, to have it in place so that when these expected changes take place in the South Australian Parliament through both houses, we'll be in a place to provide a better service when doctors find themselves with a patient who wants to go down this path. And many doctors simply won't want to be involved. What they'll be able to do, of course, is to refer that patient on.
Dr Philip Nitschke in Adelaide, thank you very much for your time this morning.